What next? Did this surveillance image show a kidnapping or a casual encounter?
It was a very curious surveillance tape.
Digital photo enhancement shows the trip wasn't consensual.
If you get into a car, you go to the second spot. Most likely, you just sign your death certificate.
Then there's a second murder, hauntingly similar to the first.
For the most part, you had a female, you had an early morning event, you had control, you had geographical area close in time, close in proximity.
Was a serial killer on the loose? Every morning, 55-year-old librarian Damaris Wynn walked for miles in Duncan Park, a 100-acre wooded area next to her house in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
If you're standing in the middle of the park, you might feel like you were on a well-traveled trail in a national park, but as soon as you took 10 or 15 steps on either side of the center, you would see houses. So it is by no means isolated.
One morning, however, she didn't return home. A few hours later, a municipal worker found her body in some underbrush in the park, less than 100 yards from her home.
She was nude with the cord from her Walkman around her neck. Jewelry still on the body, which is more important to me as a prosecutor than any other fact. Because you now know that robbery was not the motive, it's something else.
All of Damaris's clothing was gone. Did the killer take it as some sort of trophy?
The crime scene we had was a forensics nightmare for us because of the downpour where she was lying began to fill up with water.
An autopsy revealed Damaris had been sexually assaulted. The cause of death was manual strangulation, but it looked like the killer tried using the cord to her earphones.
Why wrap the cord around the neck if you choked her with your hands?
Her Walkman, however, was gone.
We feel like the suspect most likely took the Walkman. We had searched through the park trying to locate, the Walkman, her clothing, any other items that we could find, and we just did not turn up anything.
It was just this overwhelming, how can this happen in our community? And instantly people thought a stranger is amongst us.
Damaris's husband, James, said he was home when she went for her morning walk. It was a Saturday, and he didn't have to go to work. When she didn't return, he claimed he drove around the neighborhood looking for her.
He thought he was going to find his wife around the corner, holding her ankle or her leg. But he even said, as the time went on, something in his gut let him say, this just is not right.
But police found something suspicious in the couple's home. It was Damaris's Walkman.
We have the purple Walkman still in her residence. We have her outside across the street wearing a purple headphones. That was very interesting from the beginning.
When confronted with this evidence, James Wynn offered an explanation, one investigators found hard to believe. He claimed Damaris had 2 Walkmans, and he offered to take a polygraph test to prove his innocence. He failed. And then James did something even more suspicious. He had his wife's body cremated against her family's wishes.
If the husband didn't do it, then why do you have her body cremated? It could never be looked at, exhumed again and looked at, and those are the obvious reasons.
Police were convinced James Wynn was responsible for this murder until they compared his DNA to the evidence collected from his wife's rape kit.
We received a sample with the initial submission. It did not match the evidence from the rape kit.
And once they took him off the block, people then started going back to could it have been somebody else, or did he get away with murder?
The perpetrator's DNA profile was also entered into CODIS, the national DNA database. There were no hits.
It simply means that the perpetrator had not committed a crime that qualified him to be a part of our database.
It looked as if police had a random murder on their hands, the hardest type to solve. Duncan Park is a landmark in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Since 1926, families have used the park for recreation and picnics, so it's an unlikely place for a brutal murder. Investigators learned that on the day Damaris Wynn was murdered, 4 municipal workers were cutting trees in the park. All of them were asked to provide a DNA sample, as was any male who lived near the park or worked with Damaris.
We swabbed around 25 individuals. We tried to pinpoint people that we really thought may be involved, and everyone we went to, volunteered their swabs.
Again, there were no matches. 5 months later, there was a similar murder in the Reedville community of Spartanburg County, 15 miles away.
It was the same, essentially. There were some differences, but for the most part, you had a female, you had an early morning event.
32-year-old Rhonda Ward drove into the parking lot of the convenience store where she worked. It was early in the morning, and it was Rhonda's job to open the store.
Rhonda was the type of lady that if she was supposed to be there at 7, she came in at 6:30.
Security cameras in the parking lot showed a man walking up to her and having a conversation.
You can see a subject walking up the sidewalk, then he cut across, coming to the parking lot, approached her, and she was standing at the door.
It looked like the two knew one another. They got into Rhonda's car and drove away.
This was totally unlike Rhonda. It was a break in her pattern, and that's what also made me very suspicious.
36 hours later, Rhonda's nude body was found in an apple orchard about 15 miles from the convenience store.
She'd been stabbed to death and sexually assaulted. But again, because of the time of the year, it was cold, decomp hadn't started, and we had a lot to work with.
Blood underneath the body indicated Rhonda had been murdered where she was found. And just like Damaris Wynn's murder, the killer had taken Rhonda's clothes. When news of Rhonda's murder became public, a potential witness contacted police. She said that on the morning Rhonda disappeared, she was driving by the orchard where the body was found. She saw a white car parked on the shoulder of the road with 2 individuals walking toward the orchard. She said one looked like the victim. The other was a light-skinned black man. At the time, the witness didn't think anything of it.
I'm certain he had been there before, knew about the area, may have already planned it out in his mind.
Police assumed the killer had also stolen Rhonda's car. Fortunately, after speaking with the Nissan car company, investigators discovered the company had something they could do.
The ability to start the car could be disabled if payment were not made. And because of her death, she missed a payment, and the car was disabled. How they were able to do that with a satellite, I don't know, but I do know that they disabled the car.
Apparently, the gambit worked. Police found Rhonda's abandoned car 3 miles from the crime scene. Someone, presumably the killer, had set it on fire, most likely to destroy potential forensic evidence.
You just don't burn cars because they won't start, unless you got something you'll hide.
But the radio was missing. So police put word out to their informants to be on the lookout for an individual trying to sell a Nissan car stereo. Store employees who watched the security camera videotape said the man looked like Chester Donovan, a man Rhonda had been dating.
It was someone that Rhonda had more than just a friendship with.
32-year-old Chester Donovan was a teacher's aide at the school Rhonda's children attended. A background check revealed a previous arrest for domestic violence. Donovan denied any involvement and consented to a polygraph test, which he failed.
You've got him identified, you've got him failing a polygraph, and he had a connection to Miss Ward with a violent past. So, I mean, obviously, that was where the investigation was focusing.
When a witness reported seeing Rhonda Ward walking towards the orchard with an unidentified man, she was asked to identify him in a photo lineup.
Out of 6 people in that lineup, the witness we had actually picked Chester out.
Chester Donovan was dating Rhonda Ward at the time, but Donovan had an alibi. He was at work at the time Rhonda Ward was abducted.
He had an alibi better than the one I had that morning. Nobody could tell you where I was at 7 o'clock that morning, except my wife. He had about 5 people that could tell you where he was.
In addition to his alibi, investigators performed a DNA test, and Donovan's DNA did not match the biological evidence from the rape test kit. But the DNA test did provide an important clue. The DNA of Rhonda's killer matched the DNA profile of Damaris Wynn's killer.
I don't know that any of us actually expected it. There were a few that actually expected it, but there were some that were like, well, you know, it'd be a luck hit if we get it.
Investigators knew that the man with Rhonda Ward on the surveillance image was her killer. 2 surveillance cameras captured the incident, but both produced dark and blurry images. So Spartanburg investigators contacted the Secret Service, which has a lab with state-of-the-art equipment for video enhancement.
I know most people associate us with the protection of the president, but the Secret Service was originally created in 1865 as a law enforcement agency.
In fact, the Secret Service was working on technology that would get one of its first tryouts in this case.
It was just an amazing coincidence that a case of this high profile came in to our office for us to work on it.
The Secret Service discovered that the surveillance cameras in the parking lot were out of focus. To correct that, they returned to the parking lot, set up a beam of light through a panel in the same spot as Rhonda's car, then photographed it with the surveillance camera.
The single point source represents a single point of data on the image file. So in a focused camera, this point source would be a round circle. An out-of-focus camera would actually be a distorted image of that circle. And it's that image file then is used and imported into the software to attempt to refocus the image.
This camera was pretty out of focus. It was pretty bad in terms of quality. Being able to clean up, clarify some of the things in the video helped identify some of the actions that took place to put together the story of what happened.
The improved images revealed that something different happened between Rhonda and her assailant, something that investigators hadn't seen before.
She gets in the driver's side, and he has to walk around the front of the car. When he gets in, there is a slight movement of the hand.
The man reached across from the passenger seat and put the keys in the ignition. The man must have grabbed Rhonda's car keys out of camera range as soon as she got out of the car.
One thing that stood out to me as a woman is never let them take you to the second spot. If you get into a car, you go to the second spot, most likely you've just signed your death certificate.
Despite the enhanced video, the images still weren't clear enough to identify the suspect.
In this case, it was just too far away from the crime, from what happened to be able to make out faces.
Technology provided some answers, but investigators weren't any closer to finding the killer. The murders of Damaris Wynn and Rhonda Ward were 5 months and 15 miles apart. Investigators had the killer's DNA, but no clues to his identity. His DNA was not in any of the state or national DNA databases.
In our state, if you were convicted of a violent offense, then you were part of our database. You were required to provide a DNA sample to SLED to be included in our database.
The requirement became effective in 2002. So either the killer had never been convicted of a crime, or if he had, it was before 2002. As police searched their files for any crimes similar to these murders, they got a tip. They learned that a local man tried to buy cocaine by trading a radio from a Nissan automobile. This was significant, since the radio was missing from Rhonda's car when it was found.
So he went by the name Snow, so perhaps he didn't think anybody would know who he was.
But police informants identified the man as Frederick Evans. Evans lived within walking distance of Rhonda's workplace, where this surveillance video was shot. And he was no stranger to law enforcement.
This was a bad man to the core. And I've seen some of the lowest of the low. And the thing about Frederick Evans, you look at him, it doesn't scare you.
35-year-old Evans, a short-order cook, divorced with a 13-year-old daughter, served time in prison for rape and robbery prior to 2000. This was only the latest in a series of crimes that began in his teens.
Frederick Evans had one assault and battery with intent to kill, where he sliced a man's throat with a box cutter. One larceny and simple assault, where he stole a woman's purse and punched her in the face.
Evans denied any involvement in either murder. Police decided to call his bluff. They told him they'd shown the surveillance tape to his mother.
He said, "You showed it to my mom?" I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "What did she say?" And I said, "Mr. Evans, you know what she said. She identified you in the video."
Evans fell for this ruse and changed his story.
His story was that they knew each other. It was consensual sex. Got rough, they got in a fight, and she tried to stab him, and he turned around and stabbed her.
That's not even a good Lifetime television movie. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Investigators obtained Evans' DNA, and the test results left no doubt his DNA matched the biological evidence from Rhonda Ward's rape test kit. His DNA also matched the evidence in Damaris Wynn's case. Frederick Evans' friends told police that Evans was sleeping on a bench in Duncan Park on the morning of Damaris's murder. Prosecutors believe Evans abducted her, dragged her to the woods, sexually assaulted her, then strangled her to death, first with her headphones and then manually. For reasons that aren't entirely clear, it appears Evans took Damaris's clothing and her Walkman, possibly as a trophy, but didn't take her jewelry. In Rhonda's case, prosecutors believe Evans was walking through the store parking lot when he saw Rhonda Ward drive up to the convenience store to open it for the day. According to the surveillance video, he grabbed her keys, probably threatened her with violence, and told her to get in the car. Evans forced her to drive to a deserted location nearby. And that's when the witness saw the two walking towards the orchard. And just as in Damaris's case, Evans sexually assaulted Rhonda, killed her, and took all of her clothes. Later, Evans was unable to start the car because the manufacturer had disabled the starter. So Evans set the car on fire, but not before taking one last item, the car radio, which led to his capture.
Well, ma'am, it's not as it seems. It's not as it looks. You know,
what is it then? Tell me what it is.
It's two sides to every story.
Tell me your side of the story.
I don't have enough time to sit here and explain to you.
How and why did you murder Rhonda Ward and Damaris?
I'm not going to answer that.
1 year after the crimes, Frederick Evans went on trial for multiple charges, including murder and kidnapping.
You're entitled to know the impact that Rhonda Ward's death has had on her family and friends, and you are entitled to know the character of Frederick Antonio Evans, and you got it! 20 years, taking what he wants, when he wants it.
Evans did not testify in his own defense.
I used to have this old quote, do you know what you call defendants who don't testify at trial? And the answer is inmates.
The experience is one that I would not wish upon anyone. It is very time-consuming. It is very emotional. It is very heartbreaking.
Evans was convicted on all counts and was sentenced to death.
You had looked at Frederick Evans, he had a pattern. It was just a pattern that took a while for them to connect.
The only way in this day and age to get a death sentence is to have very strong forensics, and frankly, the only way to get a conviction at the guilt phase is to have strong forensics. Much more than eyewitness testimony or any of the other old standbys. It's all about science, and if you don't have science, you're not going to win.